Have you ever had a moment where everything suddenly made sense? Where the world stopped being a puzzle and became perfectly clear, even if just for a second? Maybe you felt connected to everything around you, or you saw through some illusion you'd been believing your whole life. And then, here's the strange part, when you tried to tell someone about it, the words fell flat. They smiled politely, nodded, maybe even said, "That's nice." But you could tell they didn't really get it. Why does this happen? Why can't we share the most important things we discover? Here's something that'll mess with your head. The most profound truths you'll ever discover are the ones you can never explain. Not because they're too complex, but because they exist outside the realm of language itself. They're experiences, not ideas. And once you've tasted them, you'll understand why silence is sometimes the wisest response. The philosopher Alan Watts spent decades exploring this paradox. He talked about spiritual awakening, consciousness, and the nature of reality in ways that made thousands of people stop and reconsider everything they thought they knew. But here's the irony. Watts himself often pointed out that the real thing he was describing couldn't actually be captured in his words. He was like someone trying to describe the taste of chocolate to someone who'd never eaten it. The words are useful, sure, but they're not the thing itself. And this matters more now than ever before. We live in a world where everyone's sharing everything. Your breakfast, your workout, your thoughts on politics, your spiritual journey. It's all out there for the world to see. We've been conditioned to believe that if something's important, you should post about it, talk about it, make it known. But what if some things lose their power the moment you try to package them into words? What if some truths are meant to be lived quietly, not broadcasted loudly? Your moment of awakening. Let's start with the big one, that moment when everything suddenly made sense, when the world stopped being a puzzle and became perfectly clear, even if just for a second. Maybe you were sitting in traffic or watching the sunset, or just staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m. And boom, you got it. You saw through something. The anxiety you'd been carrying for years suddenly felt ridiculous. The story you'd been telling yourself about who you are just dissolved. Your first instinct? Run and tell everyone. I figured it out. Life isn't what we think it is. But here's what happens. You sound absolutely insane. Or worse, you sound arrogant. Because you're essentially saying, I know something you don't. And the person listening, they're nodding along, but behind their eyes, they're thinking you've either joined a cult or need a good night's sleep. Why? Because awakening isn't information. It's not a fact you can transmit like the capital of France is Paris. It's more like trying to describe color to someone who's only ever seen in black and white. You can use all the words you want, but until they see red for themselves, they won't understand red. Your awakening is yours. Their awakening, if and when it comes, will be theirs. And no amount of explaining will bridge that gap. The techniques that worked for you. So maybe you got there through meditation, or breath work, or psychedelics, or just by accident while doing the dishes. And now you want to help others by sharing your exact method, right? Here's the technique that changed my life. Stop right there. What worked for you worked because of who you are, where you were in life, and what you specifically needed to break through at that moment. It's like recommending your antidepressant to a friend because it worked for you. That's not how any of this works. I knew someone who found clarity through intense physical exercise, running until his mind went quiet. He told everyone they needed to run. Just run. That's the answer. 6 months later, one of his friends had knee surgery from overtraining and still hadn't found what he was looking for. Here's the thing. Spiritual practices can become traps. You give someone a technique and they turn it into a new form of striving. They think, if I meditate for X hours, I'll achieve enlightenment. Congratulations, you've just given them another carrot to chase, another future moment they think will complete them. The awakening you had came from letting go, not from doing more. But the second you hand someone a method, you've told them to do more. See the problem? What you see in other people. Once you start seeing clearly, you start seeing through people too. And I don't mean that in a judgmental way. You just recognize the patterns. You can spot when someone is operating from fear, when they're defending their ego, when they're caught in a story about themselves that isn't even true. Your friend complains their boss hates them, but you can see the real issue. They're dismissive in meetings and interrupt constantly. Your sister insists she's unlucky in love, but you notice she only dates people who are emotionally unavailable because it confirms her belief that she's unlovable. You see it all so clearly, and the urge to help is overwhelming. Let me just point this out to them. They'll thank me. No, they won't. People aren't ready to see themselves until they're ready. And when they are ready, they'll figure it out on their own. If you try to force the insight on them prematurely, you create two things: defensiveness and resentment. They'll dig their heels in even harder because you've threatened their self-image. Think of a butterfly struggling out of its cocoon. That struggle strengthens its wings. If you cut the cocoon open to help, the butterfly dies. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is watch someone struggle with their own illusions and trust that they'll emerge when they're strong enough. The groundlessness of everything. This one's dangerous to share, so listen carefully. When you really wake up, you realize nothing is solid. Everything you thought was permanent and real, your identity, your beliefs, your entire sense of self, it's all more like a river than a rock. It's flowing, changing, never the same from one moment to the next. For you, this might feel incredibly freeing. I'm not stuck being this person. Nothing is fixed. I can let go of everything. But to someone who hasn't seen this yet, it sounds like existential horror. It sounds like you're saying nothing matters, life is meaningless, we're all just atoms bouncing around randomly in an indifferent universe. I made this mistake once at a dinner party. Someone was talking about their 5-year plan, and I said something like, "You know, the self that's making that plan doesn't even exist in the way you think it does." The conversation died immediately. They thought I was saying their goals were stupid, that their life was fake. What I actually meant was that there's so much more than the small, separate self they think they are. But that nuance got lost. All they heard was, "You're not real," and it terrified them. Some truths need to be approached slowly, or they'll shatter someone before they're ready to rebuild. Your freedom from the rules. And it's probably the most misunderstood. When you wake up, you realize that all the rules, social conventions, moral codes, the right way to live, they're all just agreements, games we collectively decided to play, and you're free to see them for what they are. But if you announce this, "I'm beyond conventional morality now," people think you've become a sociopath. They think you're about to start stealing or hurting people because you no longer believe in rules. What they don't understand is that real freedom doesn't lead to cruelty. When you truly see that there's no separation between you and others, harming someone else would be like punching yourself in the face. It makes no sense. So you naturally act with kindness, not because a rule book says you should, but because that's what flows from understanding. But try explaining this. People can't comprehend how you can be both free from moral rules and yet act morally. So they assume you're either lying or secretly waiting to do something terrible. The awakened person learns to follow conventions while knowing they're conventions. They play the game because not playing creates unnecessary chaos. They're free on the inside, but they don't need to announce it to the world. The deepest teaching is silence. Here's what Alan Watts understood better than most. The real teaching has nothing to do with words. You can talk about awakening all day long, but what actually transmits understanding is your presence. It's the way you move through the world, the calmness in your voice when chaos erupts around you, the way you listen without needing to fix or advise, the ease with which you hold paradox and uncertainty. People might not understand what you're saying about consciousness or enlightenment, but they can feel when they're around someone who's at peace. There's a quality to it, a spaciousness, a lack of urgency, a sense that this person isn't trying to prove anything or become anything. This is the real transmission, not your words, but your being. Think about the people who've impacted you most deeply. Chances are you don't remember exactly what they said. You remember how they made you feel.
You remember their presence. That's what stays with people. So instead of trying to explain your awakening, just live it. Be the peace you've discovered. Be the freedom you've realized. And trust that those who are ready will recognize something in you, not because you told them about it, but because they felt it. Words point at the moon, but presence is the moonlight itself. So what's the takeaway here? It's simple. Live your awakening, don't broadcast it. The deepest truths aren't meant to be explained, they're meant to be embodied. When you've really seen something profound, you don't need to convince anyone. Your presence speaks louder than your words ever could. People will feel something different about you. They might not be able to name it, but they'll sense a kind of peace, a spaciousness. And if they're ready, they'll ask. And when they do, you won't lecture them. You'll simply point them towards their own discovery. Because here's the secret. There's nowhere to arrive. You're already there. If this resonated with you, hit that like button. It helps more people find these ideas. And I'm curious, have you ever tried to share a profound realization and had it completely fall flat? Drop a comment below and tell me about it. What did you see and what happened when you tried to explain it? And if you want more content exploring philosophy, consciousness, and the nature of reality, subscribe to the channel. We're diving deep into the questions that actually matter. Thanks for watching. Stay awake, but stay quiet about it.